Hey, Vitor, how are you?
Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
I'm good. What about you, Wayne?
Doing well, thank you.
No, awesome.
Yeah.
Looking
So
forward for
you're
the session
yeah,
today.
thank you. Vitor has been one of our kind of founding mentors, evangelists. He has this illness that we all have, trying to evangelize Agile for HR. And so, but I don't think there's a cure for it other than we solve the problem. So we're all committed to doing that.
Yep.
If you could, if you haven't in the chat room, if you could just enter your name and where you're calling from, so we get to know each other a little better. And I apologize in advance. I've been having some system problems here. So if you see me freeze up, it's not anything you guys said. And I'm having some allergy problems today that may have me coughing. And so again, it's not anything Rebecca said or you said. It's just part of the mother nature. So we might as well get started. I want to thank everybody for coming today, attending. This is a series of colloquiums that Steve and I have been putting on starting this year. We're passionate around looking at Agile and seeing if it can make impact in HR. And our focus is really just kind of brainstorming, bringing like-minded people together to think about how Agile can apply to certain situations. We've had a couple speakers already talk about Agile performance management, Agile and project leadership. And this one is going to be on diversity, equity, inclusion. In a couple of weeks, we have people from Walmart going to be the creating a change-ready mindset. And then in December, Eric Severson from Neiman Marcus, and he's going to be he's led about 3 iterations of Agile at 3 different companies. He's going to try to bring people from all those companies together and talk about the CHRO and the executive team and how they execute and work well together in this. Again, this is Rebecca's going to talk for a little bit. This is really an open forum. We don't have all the answers. We have lots of questions. And, as we said yesterday, we want to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So we're hoping that just by coming together and having different perspectives, we can come up with some ideas around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I think it's fair to say that many companies aren't where they like to be. And can we use Agile to create meaningful progress? Steve, you want to add anything?
No, I think that's all really good context. I just want to thank Rebecca for being here. She's a wonderful former colleague of mine from the Federal Reserve Bank, and I couldn't think of anybody I'd rather have here today to do this for us than Rebecca. I just had such a wonderful time working with her at the Fed, and she's such a passionate person for this subject, and coming off the heels of her own forum, highly successful forum that she held yesterday at the Fed. So Rebecca, thank you so much for being here today, and we really look forward to what you have to share with us, and then engaging in conversation around the issues and concerns and questions that we might have from the audience. So I guess if we can move right into you.
Go ahead, Rebecca, it's all yours.
Don't forget to
Turn your
unmute.
volume up.
Unmute.
I was on mute. So thank you. Thank you, Steve, for your kind words. It's great working with you as well. And thanks, Wayne, for the invitation to just share some information. And like you both said, this is certainly around not necessarily solving the problem, but falling in love with the problem and collectively coming together to talk about solutions and how this might work. So I would invite you at any point in time in any of the information that I'm sharing, if you've got a question or you want to stop and be able to have some additional dialogue, absolutely, I welcome that. I've popped in just maybe a couple of questions as we go through this, but certainly I'm sure that there may be others that come up along the way. So I want us to be able to feel free to have that dialogue. So it's a little bit challenging, I'll say on the front end, because I come from the Fed, I can't drive the slides. So I feel a little bit out of water here, just a little bit, and being able to control that. So I don't have my notes. So if you see me looking down, please don't take that personally, but I've got quite a bit of notes in here and information that I don't want to miss. So I want to be able to get it all conveyed to you. So if we could go to the next slide, please. This is just a little bit about myself, my career. I don't necessarily think we need this to get into the discussion, but, just for the sake of having a bio here, this is here for you to be able to review at a later time. It's just coffee reading, if you will, but we can certainly move on. And here's where we really want to spend some time in terms of our discussion on how Agile thinking supports DEI efforts, the intersectionality between Agile and DEI, and how we embed DEI into the Agile processes and to outperform organizational outcomes. I think it's important, and there can be more discussion topics around this. I'm sure that as we get into this topic, there'll be more points that we want to bring up as we discuss this, but I thought we'd start here as a starting point to try to share our dialogue. Next slide. I think obviously it's time for a new approach as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and clearly the world has changed. I wanted to be able to share this because I think it is vitally important. I've been seeing this slide actually for a lot of sessions around DEI because it just really culminates what has happened over the last year, not only the global pandemic, but certainly around the racial pandemic that has bubbled up as a result of probably all of us being inside, where we witnessed in person, real time on the news, George Floyd being murdered. And so here's some additional statistics, which I also think are important to note, and just what the workplace statistics are going to look like as we move forward. Some really important around what's going to happen in 2024 around formerly seen as minorities, if you will, which I'm not even sure I'm comfortable with that word. And that's a whole nother conversation and dialogue. But
Rebecca, you've muted yourself.
Okay, sorry about that. And what I was going back to say is that around minorities, and I believe I said that I'm not even necessarily comfortable with that word. That's another kind of conversation as well as a session. But my point here is that no longer will minorities be in the minority status. It will then become the majority status. And that is not far away from here. And in 2025, just in a few years, in terms of the statistics around millennials, around they will make up 75% of the workforce. It used to be that baby boomers were the largest segment in the workforce. So we see where our demographics are quickly changing. And then around just diverse companies and around their revenue, and that how it is higher for those that are diverse. And then moving forward around companies, 43% companies of diverse boards have higher profits. I have some additional slides to certainly support some of this efforts. And I think we've all seen some of that data come through. McKinsey, PwC, we've all been seeing the studies around diverse organizations have higher profits, and yet still here we are. Racially and ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to perform better. These statistics, when you think about this, if you were just looking at this from a business perspective, and with what the growth and opportunity is in these areas, you would think if you see stats like this, it's like it would be a no-brainer, right? If we were in driving any business or organization and looking at these types of staggering statistics, telling us what is going to occur if we do this, then why then would we not do it? But yet, and still, as I said, and we've known for a while, we've not moved very much. So if we could go to the next slide. Here again, diversity, equity, and inclusion makes business sense. Some really important other statistics as well, and I won't go through all of those, but you can look at them for yourself, to further support the point that diverse organizations, diverse workforces, diverse boards certainly bring in more revenue for organizations. Have what this 58% around diverse teams lead to produce answers and questions that are 58% more accurate than teams with zero diversity. Here again, it is just unbelievable and actually vexing if you think about it, that and yet and still our organizations are less diverse. We don't have diverse leadership at the top. Our boards lack diversity. We only have 2 female Black CEOs in the Fortune 500. We had Ursula burns for the longest time, and it took decades before we got another one. So, again, the business case has been made on the importance of having diversity, equity, and inclusion. We could go to the next slide, please. I wanted to be able to level set here around Agile as we think about this discussion and conversation around, how we integrate, or even how the intersection of Agile thinking and HR intersects with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's clear that the Agile mindset coupled with DEI can meet organizational needs in driving business results. And so there is no definitive list of what makes up the Agile mindset, and I think we all can agree with that, but we're going to use the most widely accepted characteristics, for our discussion. And based on organizations' culture, goals, and team dynamics, you can adopt other attributes of Agile to help your team accelerate the impact of DEI. So for our purposes, we're going to kind of review some of the manifesto of Agile, and that is around respect, collaboration, improving cycles, learning cycles, pride and ownership, focus and deliverables, and ability to adapt change. We can all put a DEI lens on all of these attributes of Agile and talk about that, but we'll just talk about a few as we go on. But I want to be able to continue to level set in some areas so that we all clearly understand, the intersectionality between Agile and DE&I. So if we could go to the next slide. Oh, here we are. Thank you. Diversity is the mix in all of us. And I think we can all just agree on what that is around the differences that we all share. Even identical twins are diverse. It comes our backgrounds, our social economic status, our religion, where we went to school, all of those things, we are all diverse. And all of that, certainly is the mix when we think about it, physical abilities, life experiences, all of that makes up us who we are, which of course means that we're all diverse. We could go to the next slide. Now I want to talk about inclusion just a little bit. And it's truly the act of welcoming and applying that mix in and throughout the organization and threading it through. It's fostering those structural systems that we have. It's around developing our culture. And it oftentimes requires that we have that culture shift to ensure that we have that true sense of belonging that Wayne had mentioned earlier. To take that to a little bit deeper level as it relates to this essentially is where we are headed. When we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and then I'll talk a little bit more about equity and the differences there in the following slides, but just to spend a little bit of time around the intersectionality of this as it relates to, culture change and mindset, and making sure that are ensuring that we are bringing in, when we bring in diverse people into our organizations, that they are included, and what that truly means. That actually means being invited to the coffee table, that it means being invited into, the circles that we have. It means being invited to hear your voice when you're talking in a meeting. It means that you have the ability to share your voice, to be able to share your authentic voice, and also being able to bring your full self into the workplace. Sometimes we think about when we're talking about bringing your full self into the workplace, people want to temper that a bit. What does that actually mean, bringing your full self? It means bringing your full self, whatever that means. And it's our job in terms of HR to ensure that however it is we come, from whatever demographic, whatever social economic status, that one has, is that we are mindful that we want to make sure that they're fully integrated into our organization so that they too can feel comfortable to bring whatever it is we have. We all bring things, differences, baggage, all of our makeup, all of our flaws, all of our warts, and we want to make sure that we're creating environments where people can thrive. That means it's going to require us to spend a little bit of time in developing relationships so that we can understand how people best communicate. When we look at the gender as well as our generational demographics, there are a myriad of ways in which people like to communicate. People, women and men, we all know communicate differently. So we want to make sure that we're mindful and cognizant of the differences that people bring and how we can bring all of those differences together to make sure that we're really truly developing inclusive cultures. If we could go to the next slide. Equity, it applies to the structures and fairness of that diversity mix and ensuring that all people have equal access to opportunities. And I'll let you read the rest of it there, but there is some clear differences around what equity is and equality. And so, we want to make sure that we're talking about the differences in those 2 points because they are very, very divergent. And so we want to make sure that we delve a little bit into that. But right now, I'm just going to stop and ask if there are any questions, clarifying questions, or if there's any points that anyone would like to bring up. I tend to talk fast, so I want to make sure that I'm leaving space if anyone has any questions about any of the things that we've discussed thus far.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have anything to say. Or you can put something in the chat if you don't want to speak. We'll be monitoring that.
All right, we could just go to the next slide, Wayne. That means we've got crickets there. So equality. There's a lot of talk about equality and equity and racial equity right now in this space, but I wanted to just level set here as well around, I like to cook, so I'll start there in terms of how I would like to share this analogy. And so this is really simplistic around everyone receives the same. So it's the same. So the same sandwich, everyone has the equal portion. Your equal portion here would be equal portions of peanut butter and equal portions of jelly. And then the sandwich maker has control over what's in the sandwich. In this analogy, it's peanut butter and jelly. So we can go to the next slide. And this is equity. And so because I love to cook, that's something that is a passion of mine. I thought it might make sense to kind of take a little deeper dive in terms of what equity is that people have what they need to eat. So we've got some differences here. We've got tortillas, we've got rice. These are from different cultures, different parts of the world. And this is lunch, actually. So, here in America, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are pretty standard, if you're talking about kids, maybe necessarily. But these are some of the differences when we're talking about, people have what they need to eat, but it's not peanut butter and jelly. Someone may have a nut allergy. So serving a peanut butter and jelly sandwich could cause someone actually to go into anaphylactic shock. So we don't want to have that. So the same ingredients are not used for every meal. And then people have the flexibility to make their own meals. And so when I travel, I often take cooking classes in different parts of the world. So it's always interesting to see what people are serving for different cuisines and being able to learn about different cultures, which you recognize, when we think of things like, a sandwich is as simple as a sandwich, it's very, very different in different parts of the world. So to put it simply, is that equity is giving everyone what they need to succeed, making sure that removing the barriers to that point, making sure that there is fair treatment and access to opportunity to advance for all people while striving to eliminate the barriers that prevent full participation of certain groups. And so I just wanted to level set there, and I thought it was important to bring out those couple of points. And so if we can go to the next slide. Now, how Agile thinking supports DEI efforts. So if we look at the Agile principles, what we talked about, that leading inclusively fosters collaboration. We talk about collaboration not only in Agile HR, but also we talk about it a lot in DE&I as well. And then finding ways to work together to solve business challenges. Having a diverse, inclusive team helps us solve those business challenges quite quicker than we would if we had homogenous teams, because we have that differences of opinion. We're able to bounce ideas off of one another, be able to come from different perspectives, where someone might have a different experience about a problem and how to solve it, which may be something we've never thought of before. That's the fun part of it. That's that dynamic, that rich dynamic that we get when we're interacting with people who just are not thinking the same. I mean, at the end of the day, who wants a bunch of Rebeccas walking around? I mean, I know I don't. So we have to think of that in that context, and then how, agile thinking supports some of this. So here's just a question that I wanted to throw out. How do you see collaboration enhancing DEI and agile thinking?
Well, Rebecca, this is Steve. I'll and then see if anybody else will jump in. But and it's the essence of Agile for me is it is a collaborative experience. The whole idea of Agile, the Agile works well and best when it is a truly collaborative experience. So I really see that collaboration done in an Agile-like way, but in a setting of DEI, can be an incredibly powerful way, and perhaps even a gateway into fostering this in organizations that haven't given the thought of this yet.
Great point, Steve. Anyone else?
I have a clarifying question that I want to make sure that I'm understanding. So is it thinking through how you can use Agile to think about some of the efforts, or how Agile itself might contribute to inclusive teams? I don't know if it sounds like there's a little bit of both.
So it's a little bit of both, but more
Okay.
probably the latter.
Okay.
One of the things that I find valuable about Agile is the focus on experimentation and improvement, right? So we're not expecting to get it perfect the first time, but we want to keep iterating until we get that. And I think, again, I'm not an expert at DEI and, not being a diverse person per se, but, if we could just keep iterating, I guess we have this DEI program, we put it in there and then we expect it to work. And it seems like it's a one and done. It's a program focus versus outcome. I'm just wondering if we could, have an iterative, incremental focus on this to keep getting better. I asked people in the organization who do DEI more than I do, is that a challenge? Do you see that happening? Is it, we develop a program, we deliver it, we train it, and we kind of forget about it, but is it iterative? Is it incremental process improvement? I'm just kind of curious people's viewpoints on that.
So Wayne, I just want to challenge you just on a point that you made, that you said on someone that's not diverse. You are diverse. You're a white male, but you bring in your different experiences.
That's true.
You're in higher education. So we want to make sure that we are level setting, that just because you're a white guy does not mean that you're not diverse. And so that is sometimes a misnomer that people have when they think about this work, that it's everything but white, but absolutely every individual walking on the face of this planet is absolutely diverse. So we just want to make sure that we've got that clarified. But then when we talk about some of the principles of Agile, I want to bring up one point that when I was doing some research about this, because I find it such an interesting topic on how we can leverage this more, but it's in using stand-ups. Stand-ups are a part of Agile and how, teams work. But when we think of some of that coming together and, sharing challenges, on projects and how the teams support one another, and truly around collaboration. But then there are areas where these stand-ups don't necessarily work when we're putting a DEI lens on it. And what I mean by that is that, stand-ups require us to, sometimes, and in some instances, you can kind of think about it, it's probably more for the introvert. It's someone who might be an outspoken, who is ready to raise their hand and be able to share what's going on, what's happening. If you see this dynamic, sometimes, the voice that gets paid attention to the most is the voice that's the loudest. And so when you're thinking about DEI on this lens, that necessarily may not work, because you've got to be able to think about that person who is more of the introvert, who doesn't necessarily want to speak out in this setting and in this format, that may not work very well for them to be able to share those experiences. And then also, when you think about stand-ups, typically these folks have been together or they've established relationships. We need to make sure that people who are on the fringes, that we're bringing them in so that they too can share not only about their projects, but about more of themselves. That way we have a greater opportunity of including them into the stand-ups so we can learn more about some of the challenges that they may be facing on a project and be able to support their efforts. So that's why I like to use this analogy, around stand-ups, and that is a process of Agile, but that it is also a process that can be improved with putting a D&I lens on it in this instance.
Can I add something here too, like a question? Victor from Philips. One of the things that I realized, and also being unconscious bias facilitator as well, is the role of bias in the kind of the approach, right? So like you said, like a stand-up can be something that is more kind of, a comfort zone for someone that is outspoken, but not so much a comfort with you or like more introvert. So how do you think, the companies should prepare themselves in terms of, having that knowledge that it's not just about collaboration, because collaboration can actually raise some of the bias problems that like confirmation bias or, group thinking and things like that, that actually goes against innovation, against Agile. So how do we leverage that? What's your experience, Rebecca?
So I think it's critically important, and we'll talk about this a little bit later around education, to your point around unconscious bias. I don't think we talk enough about it. Most organizations, when they are, providing these trainings, and I'm not even comfortable necessarily with the word training because that means it's the end point. This is ongoing education and learning in this space. And so I think it's important that it continues to evolve. And so unconscious bias training is critical, but it needs to be more than a dip and done. To your point around confirmation bias, just like me bias, all of the biases that encompass unconscious bias, people need to understand how we can't mitigate, we can't get rid of bias. I mean, it's just obviously we can understand and have the understanding that it is a brain function. We all have bias, but we do need to understand how to mitigate it and how it shows up. To the speaker's point around how confirmation bias shows up, how if we are in a stand-up, if you will, and that just like me bias, you're looking at some of your direct reports and they may just be as verbose or may talk with their hands and express themselves the way that I do. I want to make sure that I'm also paying attention to the individual that, again, that is an introvert, that this is completely uncomfortable and outside of their comfort zone to even be in this setting. And how am I going to, as a leader, as an inclusive leader, and I think we don't talk even enough about that, inclusive leadership and what those skills might be, to be able to help us ensure that we are being inclusive of all. And that's really around the equity piece, making sure that we're providing opportunities for everyone so that we can remove those barriers so people can thrive. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I agree. It's a journey. It's not a training like a one and done.
Absolutely.
I might also add that, Agile is very focused on the customer, right? And it makes sure that things are built customer expectations. So who's the customer, right? And so I think how Agile could be helpful is making sure they have all the constituents, all diverse opinions, all diverse customers as part of the process. So that when you build something, it revolves around everybody's needs, not just, one with a certain agenda. So I think that's another aspect that I think Agile helps promote the E&I.
Great point, Wayne. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments?
Some nice comments in the chat. We'll get to them a little later, I think.
All right, excellent. Let's go to the next slide, please. Intersectionality between Agile and D&I, and these are just a couple of points that I thought would be important to point around transparency, inspection, and adaptation. When we think about transparency, certainly everyone needs to go on, needs to know what's going on, and that also is an important element when we're talking about DEI. Oftentimes, as an example, organizations now are just now, as this has been going on for decades, are starting to share their workforce data information. This is something that is closely held to organizations because they don't want to be called out. They're talking about how diverse that they want to be. we can talk about all of the statements and platitudes organizations made, after George Floyd and all of the commitments they were going to have and start sharing these numbers. But at the end of the day, when you start taking, moving the glass and going behind the curtain, they're really not as diverse as they say they are, or even as they attempt to be. And then going even deeper, you're finding that their efforts are just don't necessarily have on the meat and on the bone. So when we think about the intersectionality, from an Agile perspective, it's all about transparency. It's all about knowing where you are in the project, so everyone's up to speed. So when at the end of the day, we all can feel comfortable in saying that we are aware of our goals, our objectives, we understand where we need to go. And because we are demonstrating that transparency about what needs to happen, what needs to occur, so that everyone can meet the need. But when we're talking about transparency in the D&I space, that's where we really need more of, right? We need to start sharing that information so we know, so the workforce knows, so there's no ambiguity around thinking, does someone get promoted or does someone not get promoted? Let's be transparent and share that information around what that process is, what it looks like, who's being promoted, making sure that we're showing those workforce demographics. Every company in the United States and even abroad are looking to diversify their workforce. But at the end of the day, we see it's a revolving door. People are coming in and going out. And that is where the inclusion piece and that sense of belonging, it really needs to be strengthened. And so, through some of the Agile practices around how we want to ensure collaboration is strengthened, making sure that when we're talking about our customer around that customer are your employees in this instance, and making sure we're getting that feedback around what is their true experience. And then not only asking about feedback, but actually actioning on the feedback that you've received. Oftentimes employee engagements, they go on through every organization. They talk about how employees are engaged or disengaged. And we all know of the extreme billions of dollars of cost and lost revenue for employees who are disengaged or, stay and go attitude. But the end of the day is that we need to act. We need to really, truly treat our employees as customers in this instance, to be able to take that feedback and action on it. And then, of course, adaptation on around continuous improvement. We talked about this. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is definitely a journey. It is not a sprint. I've been in this space for 20 years, and there is no arrival point. We can just all agree around that. We used to talk about we wanted to work ourselves out of the job. That's not happening. Not in this time, and probably not in my lifetime or anyone on the call. The way that our world is changing, the things that we're seeing in the United States and across the world, there is a more and more need to make sure that we have individuals, companies, really committing to the work of ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion has sustainability within our organizations. We can go to the next slide. Embedding D&I into the Agile process outperform organizational outcomes. And these are some of the areas when I talked about earlier around education. I can't say that enough. It has to be ongoing and it is iterative, and we need to make sure that we have more and more of it. There is no end date on it. Obviously, unconscious bias is a big part of this work, but also around inclusive leadership and around what that means, and truly understanding that you don't have to be a leader to have inclusive behaviors. And being an ally and an advocate and what that means, making sure that in instances where you see something, say something, and taking that initiative to be able to learn outside of your own culture, your own experiences. That is a one way, a very simple way that you can be able to expand your thinking, understand what it's like to live in someone else's shoes. Going back to George Floyd, it was a point in time in America where Black people have been talking about policing for decades, but it was only at that instance where people had that aha moment to say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that this was going on. So it's in those points, sadly, that's what it took to get us to this place where we are. But there are other opportunities that we all don't take advantage of in terms of expanding our learning, being able to support and understand different cultures, different experiences will help us be stronger advocates and allies within our own organizations. Create welcoming environments to achieve that sense of belonging. I think we've talked a bit about that. And then normalizing conversations about race and ethnicity. You know, this is not the elephant in the room. Race exists. When you see me, you see a Black woman. So we need to make sure that we have the comfort zone and develop the skills to be able to talk about it in a way that's not divisive. And then build trust. At the end of the day, for all of this work, any of this work, not only in Agile, but in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to build it on trust. It underpins all of the work that we do. The next slide. And then this is just a really wonderful video as I was researching some of this that I thought would be really be able to culminate this conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to have some dialogue on the back end, and I'm hoping we'll be able to hear it, but we'll talk about this on the other side.
Fingers crossed.
Can you feel it? This shift, like the earth moved a bit, like what wasn't possible before is now almost in our grip. Can you hear it? The chants, like this moment is ours, like the whole world is watching, like this is the start. Can you see it? Our ambition as we move towards a new vision by reimagining what we know and giving hope a new description. This is the moment. Nothing matters more than this. We have the chance to create real change instead of just empty words and promises. Together, we can do this. Lift every hand, lift every voice, for every person, for every purpose, for every unheard voice. Diversity is more than just a poster. Inclusion shouldn't be a burden. A plethora of identities create ideas way bigger than one person. And that is the future we are after. A future we are trying to create, where people who look like me or you can build, design, and innovate.
There is power
in our difference.
We are ready and we are strong.
The future is ours to shape. But which side of history will you
Oh no.
be on?
Be on.
We survived the technology.
Yay.
Great video.
All right. I think it's a fantastic video. It gives me shivers, and I've seen it probably already at least 10 times now, trying to make sure that it fit inside the PowerPoint, but I think it is extremely powerful. I think it is absolutely for the moment. It's a time, it's something that we all need, but to recognize that this is the moment and we have an opportunity to be a part of this, and where do we want to stand on the side of history as we continue to work in this struggle, if you will, to be able to make sure that we move on and that we are building sustainable workplace cultures where we all have the opportunity to thrive and to grow and to succeed. And so I will end it there. There's another slide that I had at the end, which is it's in our hands. And this is a picture of Nelson Mandela's hands. And so I think no further commentary needed there.
Great.
So I'll open it up for any questions.
Yeah.
Rebecca, I have a question, if I could, to maybe just get the conversation started. But it seems to me that in the last 20, 30 years, we've had several moments, right, that where opportunities to make meaningful impact has been there. And there's always a lot of optimism and hope that this is the one event that pushes things in the right direction. How confident are you that we've arrived at a point with true momentum here versus just and how quickly might it dissipate? And what do we need to do in order to maintain and sustain the energy and the passion that comes out through that video that all of us as leaders can start to implement in the way that we organize ourselves and our people with us?
That's a great question. Steve actually talked about that yesterday. It's a question that I'm asking all of my DEI colleagues in this space. since George Floyd was murdered, I have been cautiously optimistic. And what I mean by that is that clearly I think this is an opportunity. Being in the space as long as I have, I've never seen the momentum that we see right now. There are organizations all across this country and across the nation that are looking for D&I professionals to be able to lead their organizations to a place where they're more inclusive and more diverse. And at the same time, the caution that is raised is around, we saw, I don't know, I want to say it was $43 billion promised as of last year. And when we look at the organizations to pull the covers to see what's really been done, there hasn't been much to prove there. So, companies were quick to put out platitudes around what they would do in this space, but we've yet to see any of the results. There have been some, but they've been incremental. They've not been what they actually promised. And clearly the work is not going as fast as it could. But there, I will say that given that we're in this space, I think there's an opportunity. It's like when the cameras are all off and things aren't occurring, what's really going to happen at the end of the day? It's going to require the commitment level of organizations. And that's where we talk about going in now. It's the employees are at the, they're in the control, they're in the driver's seat now. More and more employees are demanding that organizations stand up to justice, making sure that they're making a stand, drawing a line in the sand. And so we've not seen that before. Corporations have a lot of weight and a lot of pull and a lot of ability to force change if need be. So I will still stay in the camp around being cautiously optimistic in terms of what do we need to do. I think we need to keep our foot on the gas. We need to be more vigilant as ever. If it's requiring around unconscious bias learning and education, that needs to be ongoing efforts, but then also around transparency and really developing clear, concise strategies in terms of how organizations plan to diversify their workforce. If it requires coming up with some metrics, what does that actually look like? Come up with targets. We all know that we can no longer come up, do it required having quotas, but we can come up with metrics to say that by 2025, we're going to increase our female representation by X. And there needs to be accountability, not only, for those of us that are driving this work, but accountability needs to go top down, bottom up. It needs to be definitely communicated to the entire organization that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a strategy, a business strategy for the organization. It's not just HR driving these initiatives. It is a business imperative that we move the dial. We know what the demographics are going to look like from a gender perspective as well as an ethnicity perspective. And to honestly think that if we are not going to be able to engage, to be able to recruit, retain these different demographics, what are our organizations going to look like? So, accountability needs to come from the top. If we're not measured, if this were a P&L, and we're not making our numbers, we'd be having some very different conversations with our leaders. So similarly, we need to behave differently and treat this not as this appendage or bolt on, but really threading the principles and the mindset of Agile and D&I throughout the organization. So there isn't any part in any organization that D&I does not touch. So we need to make sure that we're treating it as such.
I feel like responsibility is so critical, and I'm also optimistic that I see the changing demographics of the workforce being an added push in this direction. As you said, the change in the attitudes of the people coming into organizations. People joining an organization today are looking for a better exchange of the value that they get for their efforts putting into the organization. So I feel that's a really powerful force that we need to think about, and I think Agile lends itself really well to attracting that, because along with that attitude always comes the opportunity to do something bigger than yourself. And advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in an organization can be a really important part of somebody's work experience. Jean,
I think you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question. So first I have to say that I'm one person, but there are actually 6 folks on the line from J&J. We're the acquisition and divestiture project management team. And I had my coworkers join me. So we have a bunch of folks, and this question comes from a gentleman named Matt Crever. And it's more of a tactical question, but as we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion and Agile methodology, he's wondering how you manage with the momentum that we're going, getting the additional information, how do we manage the communication and still move quickly? If you have any guidance or thoughts or sharing on experiences that you've had in doing this.
Good question.
So I think that that's an interesting question. I think clearly you have to work together. You know, when we're talking about communication right now, we're working on a racial equity strategy that we're going to deliver over the entire core organization, but you've got to work very closely with your communication team in terms of how you deliver those key messages. You've got to determine what those key messages are for senior leaders, managers, as well as employees, you know, on the ground. And I think that, you know, I don't want to say go fast, but you've got to certainly have a plan in terms of how you get there. What are your milestones going to be along the way? Making sure that you're communicating the right message often. You know, I think that sometimes things around this space can get lost in translation. You've got, you know, a senior leader talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then that's where it stops. So key messages have to be developed for the entire organization so that they understand what does it mean to them. So what does that with them? What does it mean to the employee who works in a manufacturing plant versus someone who is sitting working at home and doing a Zoom meeting like we are? We've got to make it clear and make it real for every person so that they understand what it means and what it can mean to them personally. I think that sometimes can be missing as well. You know, people, you may have, you know, lofty ideas around what this means, but I think we all can come up with experiences around how we've either been marginalized, how we've been micro inequities, our experiences being the one and only in a room, being the only woman, being only the Black woman, you know, someone with a disability, an introvert, an extrovert. I mean, it goes across the board. But I think that it's important, absolutely, to be able to communicate that with them for every employee and what does that mean to them moving forward, and then ask for their input. We need to, you know, so there's skin in the game, making sure that you're including them in the conversation. That requires having some courageous conversations, having focus groups, making sure they're a part of the solution rather than just, you know, here is some strategy that we're going to roll down. We want to make sure that people have actual input. And when we know people have input and more buy into it, we have a greater success of implementation being successful.
Yeah, let me just add one of the things that I would add from an Agile perspective, is certain cadence in Agile activities. You know, we do things in a time box activity. 2 to 3 weeks, we have to deliver something. You know, we have short daily sprints. And so that cadence develops some accountability. It develops some momentum, right? If you say you're going to have you know, how might I improve ERGs as an example? All right. You break it down into how you're going to do that. And then you actually have specific actionable items in time boxes so that, you know, again, these are not onerous time boxes, but it's based on the capacity and the capability of the team. So you're actually going to organize the work and schedule it so that there's a little more accountability, a little more rigor than just kind of, well, we'll get to wherever we can, or in 6 months we want to do this. So that's why I see Agile can be helpful, is we have a little more structure with accountability and successes. The problem many projects is we do things without getting any successes. We don't have any milestones. We get distracted. We get depressed because we're not getting anything done. But with Agile, you have those mini celebrations every couple of weeks. And so I would challenge the people on the call, can we start looking at Agile, inculcating some of the practices inside organizations? So we put sprints together. We put, you know, actionable Scrum meetings, things like that, to really help, you know, continue the momentum and make some progress on this.
Thank you.
I would just add, and Wayne, this is something you alluded to earlier, the power of experimentation, right? So the notion that, you know, a lot of us sort of approach this problem with the intention of trying to hit it out of the park on the first swipe. What we really want to do is make our way meaningfully to a desired outcome. So let's put together a series of experiments that help to see and then evaluate those experiments to see which really works the most profoundly in the organization. And that might require doing a bit of research, having some focus groups, as Rebecca said, having some conversations with then users who might have a skin in the game around this, and really finding out what's the biggest thing we can do right now that has the easiest to implement, but has the biggest impact in the organization, and run it as an experiment. but pay attention to the results. And if it's advancing the cause in the right direction, and build upon that, and then ultimately scale it. So that power of experimentation is so critical to Agile, I think.
Thank you.
I would like to also add that I think for me, from my perspective, you're preaching to the choir in terms of moving DEI beyond the performative and pushing DEI outside of the HR tinted glasses that we tend to use that's the only time that we're talking about DEI. And yet there are issues around mentoring and developing and sitting at other tables that are just as critical to the DEI process. And I think that is where Agile comes into play in terms of advancing those causes. I think one of the, if there's a question for me, it is, okay, I am that hiring manager and I have one position, and I can either address this DEI initiative that my boss's boss has brought forward, or I can appease the person who the long suffering hasn't had a promotion, and this is the slot that I have to give it to them. The DEI candidate isn't going to know, or I don't have to deal with that. The candidate at my site, I've got to look at them and say, well, once again, for whatever reason, you did not get this role. And so how do you feel that Agile or DEI can address or account or address those two issues?
You've got a tough question, Larry.
Yeah, I know. That's what Wayne and Steve told me to ask, by the way.
Well, Larry, you're assuming it's a zero-sum game, right? So,
Well,
I mean, in some ways it is, right? But, I guess in organizations, we talk about hierarchical growth, people want to get promoted. And I think because there's less layers now, right? It's more of a horizontal approach. So with this individual who, and again, I'm just brainstorming here, it's an individual who you want to meet the numbers, right? You want to have a diverse group, but is a promotion the only thing this person really needs or wants? Is there additional assignments, additional projects that would satisfy that? I mean, again, brainstorming, it's a tough call. I don't think it's a clear answer.
I think part of the answer, though, lies in what Rebecca said in her presentation, which is around the transparency question, right? If your culture is open, and you have a practice of sharing information honestly and openly with people, then those conversations that are listed as crucial or difficult to have become a little easier when there's a culture of transparency in the organization, and you can speak more honestly to people. Maybe that's part of the answer too. It's not a single one-trick pony thing here, but I think to me, a lot of what we're speaking to really comes back to what is the mindset of the culture? How open is it? How transparent is it? How open is it to feedback? And how willing is it to learn and adapt? I think those 3 points that Rebecca made were really powerful thoughts in my mind, and about how can Agile be integrated with those 3 initiatives or legs of a stool to be able to build a culture. Wayne and I have spent a lot of time with clients around Agile implementation, realizing that actually it's very difficult to do when the culture doesn't support it. So we actually go back and spend a lot of time unraveling the elements of the culture, trying to get people to understand the importance of the mindset that's needed here. And we often, again, come down to Rebecca's 3 points of transparency and feedback and the adaptation. It's so critical. If those things are present, then a lot of this stuff becomes so much easier to do down the line.
And I think Larry brings up a great point. And this is probably a challenge in every organization. This is the essence of really what the issue is, Larry, right? I mean, and you've spaced that. So, if we could solve this question, I think we'd do a much better job, because again, it's a either or. The person doesn't get promoted, he's pissed off, he thinks that people are being favored versus him, and the new person comes in and all of a sudden they have politics because the other person's pissed off, and it's so it happens every day. So how do we get beyond this? Anybody even ideas, chime in.
So this is Carmen from Dashlane. I don't know if you can hear me. Well,
Yes.
One thing that we did when we started to look into our processes around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is compensation and promotion process. That was probably one of our very first projects that we tackled. so that in this scenario that Larry brought up, which is actually very common in a lot of companies, we somewhat can avoid a lot of it because we can plan ahead, thinking about our process being twice a year, we are going to be reviewing every single person on every team to see who might be eligible for a promotion. So we know at least 6 months in advance, and sometimes even more. If we see someone with a potential, maybe they're not going to be ready yet for the next cycle, but the following cycle. So, and then we include this when we are looking into the hiring plan for the next year. So that way, we're not necessarily comparing those two. Nobody should be in a situation, if they are really performing well, they are deserving to get a promotion, not get it just because we, have an open role that perhaps was, posted for how long. It's not something that's going to solve for every problem, but it definitely is going to help with seeing more in advance what's coming up ahead, so we can prepare better, and we can prepare our hiring team as well. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah,
with analytics and data. Go ahead, Larry. I'm sorry.
Well, I'll be quick. I quite honestly have been advocating that somehow we need to separate the promotion process from the hiring process, and that you do exactly as you say, Carmen, that you know when a position is coming up, but performance and promotion are, in my opinion, very different things. And so if you've got your finger on the pulse of your team, you know who's performing well and who is at that spot where they really should be competing against a hire. They should be given their own just rewards. But that's
exactly.
a hard sell to make.
That's a really good point. And there is another thing that you solve with it, which is competitiveness with your peers, because you should not be working in order to beat someone who is on your team. We're working as a team all together, and especially in this agile world, like we need to be able to work with people and not sort of against people just because we want to be able to be promoted. Everybody should have that opportunity. So I really hope that they're going to be able to see this, or there's going to be more even external pressure, sort of say that companies really do that and separate those two processes.
What are the comments? These are really good. As usual, Larry brings up good point, Larry. Larry is one of our students in our last class developing an agile leader in the organization.
Hey, it's a quid pro quo kind of thing. I can ask another question if want, but
Go ahead.
I don't want to monopolize the process either, though.
Go ahead, Larry.
Okay, how then do you move D&I down the food chain? Because we have these performative pronouncements from the leader on high saying, hey, you know what, we're going to do these great and wonderful things and changing our diversity and equity and initiative issues. But getting that first level manager, that first level supervisor, that first level operator to buy into this concept is a difficult task. And so how do you approach that? And
certainly from a standpoint.
Where that question comes from, I remember reading, or not reading, I listened to an article or a presentation by Ken Frazier, one of my heroes at Merck, the past CEO. And he said, in his inner circle, he has done a great job of addressing DEI issues, but in his first line managers, he has not done as well. And he couldn't figure out, and I'm wondering how others would figure out how to crack that issue. Uh-oh.
Anybody have suggestions?
I hope I haven't broken the internet.
No. That's good. I mean, we want thought-provoking problems so we can figure out solutions, eventually.
Go ahead, Ariel.
I wonder if it doesn't expand on Rebecca's response to me when I was asking her tactically from Matt, my coworker, what do you implement? And the response was, you need to have a communication strategy at different levels for all aspects of the organization. So it's not that you're treating people any differently, but you're acknowledging that different people have different needs, responses, expectations, and experiences. So maybe Larry, it's going from the level, which is his first leaders where he's intimate, and acknowledging that the next set of line leaders don't need the same treatment. So it goes back to that difference between equal versus equity. So what do those line leaders need from a DEI perspective to get them to move? So maybe it's the awareness that you have the goal, but how you're going to implement it is not going to be a cookie cutter across all levels. And it's going to take that research to figure out what it is. That's my guess.
I really love that answer, Jean. I think Larry, the one thing that occurs to me in the way that you asked the question is the power of getting other people to pick up the mantle of responsibility, right? And one of the things that we tend to manage these things in organizations in a very process-oriented way, or with regulations, or with measures and performance standards and so on. But I would put a lot of power in storytelling, a way to really appeal to the heart of people in an organization. What are the stories of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in your organization that need to be told? Imagine having a film like the one Rebecca shared with us for your own organization, and being able to reflect back into the organization what true diversity exists within the organization that needs to be tapped into. And having people see the opportunity to bring what they have to the table is a powerful way, I think, of transferring this information from being in someone's head to getting it into their heart somehow. And we often sort of try to deal with this issue in a business oriented way, when I think in many ways it's more of making an emotional connection. And I think storytelling is a powerful way of doing that. If you can bring some element of storytelling into it, I think it could be a powerful way to transfer that capability.
Ariel, you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm totally new to this, and so if I'm saying anything that's like completely not agile, I'm really sorry. And I'm saying this.
No, the experimentation. There's no wrong answer. So.
I always call everything a pilot. That's my go-to word. So this is from an HR perspective, because I'm an HR business partner. So the success to me lies in several things. Number one, ongoing communication with management. So the leaders, I used to work with Anderson Consulting and PwC, and the leaders always cascade information down on a very regular basis, that it hits all the way down, literally to the employees. I've not seen that in most companies, only really in professional services, but that's just been my experience. And the other thing is, it needs to be part of the vision and mission, not just of the company, but all the way down to the department, so that the employees in that department are able to work knowing what their place is in the company, how they fit into the vision, how they fit into the success of the company. And often we see, I mean, I worked for Wells Fargo and 280,000 employees. And if you asked a secretary, in Des Moines, Iowa, if she or he understood how their particular small piece of the pie was related to the mothership, is what we called it, they had no clue, nor did the next levels up. So to me, and this is easier said than done, although I've seen it done in professional services, it's really important to push it down. And then one other thing about DEI, and Rebecca, you might know better than me about this, but it's important for managers to understand their people really well. And most managers that I've found do not. They don't know how to assess skills. They don't know how to give honest, timely feedback. They want to be liked, so they don't want to give feedback that may be so crucial for people to improve on, because, and I've seen this a lot, the person's Black, or the person's a female, or they're, pregnant or whatever. Oh my God, I don't want to be sued. So we have that problem globally, number one. And number two, there are quiet people in the corner that are sitting and they're doing their job really well. They could very well be leaders, and they could be in all the groups that we're looking for to diversify, but they're not noticed. And so I've spent my whole career, 30 years, trying to teach managers how to give appropriate feedback, how to figure out and find out what their people can do and how. It's very hard. Most managers don't have those skills. So I know we can't start from scratch, but I think that the companies that do this well, or the departments, because very often it could be a department with that particular manager that does it well, I think gives us a chance. So for me, it's almost one painful, small experience at a time, which isn't enough to make that huge impact, but it's something. I don't know. Did that make sense? I don't even know if that's
Yeah,
agile.
absolutely.
You know, you make a good point too, that for most people in an organization, the person who creates the experience for an individual is their direct manager, right? So if they are not well skilled in communication skills, in giving feedback, in supportive behaviors,
Right.
then that person then becomes very prone to become disillusioned with their job and want to move on to somewhere else.
Right.
So it's a very critical, important touch point in any organization that manager capability needs to be as profound as it can be to hold on to the people in the organization. And if there's a lack of skill there, you have to really think about, well, why did I promote them in the first place? And what have I got to do to remediate them now that they're in this position of power? They can have detrimental effect in the organization if they don't do these skills correctly or don't do them with a meaningful intent. So it's a very complex question with a lot of dimensions to it. But again, I think for me, Larry, it's going back to firing on all things, facts as well as emotions brought into play to create a meaningful and compelling reason why you matter and how what you bring counts for the organization.
I don't know if I could just add one thing. In our version of Agile, we focus on using everyone's assets, including their hidden ones. It's like the old iceberg analogy. An iceberg, you only see a tip of it. We believe the tip of it is really where you see the visible assets, but there's a whole inventory of other assets people can bring to the organization which are not seen. And so what we try to do is find what those are, bring them out. Because in an area where we don't have a lot of extra resources and money is tight, everybody's overworked, we can tap into those hidden assets that we already have in people that can help us better off. And so that was a key finding, we call strategic doing, that we use in our course, that really, I think, makes a big difference.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If I may add a couple of things.
Sure.
So one, it's definitely a thing, like a challenge that we see with some of our managers as well. And usually our go-to sort of solutions to that is, one, meet them where they are. It's really important to, obviously we are a global company, so the way I'm talking to someone who maybe has more exposure to these topics in the US versus somewhere else, like in Portugal or in France, it is different. I need to approach the conversations differently. We do that a lot through our people partners. We also do have specific trainings throughout the year. We talk about it during onboarding. So basically we talking about it in so many different aspects of the company. So they see it, they feel it. And another thing is we recognize sort of called the champions in each of the departments or teams, and they can also help kind of build this trust with the managers and show maybe success. If a lot of times we can hear like, well, why don't we just hire someone? We already have so many people in the pipeline. Why do we need to do this additional work to look for a more diverse candidates in the pipeline? Maybe we can show success from someone else and show them that exactly it did not really affect the timeline. Someone was still able to hire someone else who was still within that timeline of hiring. And then perhaps that manager can help influencing another manager. In that sense, it doesn't always come from HR or the people partner. It also comes from the team or departments that had success.
We've also seen some good issues with peer coaching at the manager level, where managers work together to help one another out, and they sort of look out for each other and watch them in their journey. And it's a way then to sort of give some quiet feedback informally by another manager and saying, have you thought about doing it this way? Try this. Observing somebody can be you can learn a lot just by watching them, and another manager who's sharing the same experience, buddying up together and being coaches to one another essentially might be a good tactic to try. Sorry, Ariel, go ahead.
I have one other thing, because Carmen, you just brought up something that I remembered. So most of the time, to me, it's what's in it for me. We have to be able to tell that manager at any level, I work for senior leaders. I need to tell them what's in it for them, because often they don't even know. And I will say, in my last position, the way I did that, and I don't know if this works everywhere, but in brokerage, as you probably know, banking brokerage, people are very competitive, financial advisors and all that. And, I would point out that this particular region has done X, Y, Z, and this is their success. And so my regional president would say, what do you mean? How did they do that? Well, if you'd like to be in that same, category, then let's talk about all the steps. It's more, it's almost like, I feel like we have to trick them sometimes into doing these things so that there's some carrot for them, and then they do the right thing. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do in my part, but it's to me, it makes for a more successful in certain environments situation, because then the people that really need to be, promoted or seen as high potentials, there's more of impetus for the leader to say, well, I want to be the same as the Florida region. And so I did promote a little of that. It's different in every organization, in order to get several females and Black males promoted and brought into the high potential bucket, because they didn't want to be different. So there's other ways to do it, but the what's in it for me, I think that's a human thing. And if we can show that as much as possible, that helps.
Yeah.
I am always flabbergasted by the numbers that Rebecca showed in terms of the impact of DEI. And we have some pretty bright people at the top of the helm, and you can see those numbers and you still question why DEI.
Rebecca, I want to bring, I'm sorry you had a connection failure there, but Larry asked a wonderful question that kept the space going while you were reconnecting back in. But I'd love to weigh in on your thoughts on this, since you didn't get a chance to answer it. But Larry's question was essentially, how do we get it down from, Larry, why don't you rephrase your question again and let Rebecca jump in on it.
Write these things down, Steve. They just come up all of a sudden.
It's in your head. I guess it's really about the transference.
Yeah, the question evolves around this notion that you have the E-suites that have this pie in the sky, performative statements and challenges to the group, and then you have the frontline manager who just misses that message completely because they have a different set of issues that they have to deal with. And so how do you bring that down through the organization? I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but maybe there's another answer or another response to it, or additional response to it.
Unmute, Rebecca.
I think I heard someone mention, I think it was Ariel, who talked about what the WIFM. I think I talked about that a little bit as well. But certainly, I think that you need to have that communication plan for all different levels of the organization to really understand what does that mean to them on an individual basis. For that person, for that frontline manager that is having issues, and I'm making this up, some micro inequities against a manager, really drilling down around what that, addressing specifically what those micro inequities and the effects that they're causing this individual to be disengaged, as an example. So I think it's clear that we need to be able to explain why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, not only from a strategic point of view, but how that actually manifests itself through up and down throughout the organization, that we're going to make sure that we have more inclusive policies around healthcare, around childcare, around leave, maternity leave, paternity leave. What does all of those things look like, and how are some of the strategic initiatives that we're driving touch every employee at every level, which can be very different. What does that look like we said, for frontline? What does that look like for people still going into the office, et cetera? So I think it's important to communicate the value proposition to everyone. Why is this important from a organizational level, but why is it important from an employee level? And I think getting that, of course, that feedback from employees to help them understand why it should be and why it is important to them will certainly go a long way.
And can it be just a poster on the wall and an email?
No.
What form does that take?
No, absolutely. It has to be more. It has to be those meetings, those conversations. When we're talking about education and learning, it should be every employee. And I come from the camp that it should be mandatory. I think that if we're talking about ethics, if we're talking about sexual harassment, those types of trainings are mandatory within organizations. Similarly, I believe diversity and inclusion and equity should be the same. Those individuals that need it most, if it were optional, they would certainly opt out. So I think it's important to have that education and learning for every employee in terms of why it's important. What initiatives are we going to drive? Not everything is going to be driven at the same way or the same format, but I think there are certainly initiatives that can be driven at an employee level. When I talked about having conversations around team meetings, what is that dynamics? What are those dynamics going to look like for every employee? There are tools that are available in this space to be able to have those types of conversations at every level of the organization. But then, of course, you need to do that analysis. You need to take that deep dive and really dig into not only the data, but to the experiences of employees to be able to get to some of the solutions. If you don't know what you don't know, I'm not sure how you'd be able to help the organization move forward in a way that has sustainability. So I think it's important to engage the organization in that analysis to be able to help move them forward.
Gina, do you have anything you wanted to add? Well, I think we're at our time limit here. Wow, interesting conversation here. I learned a lot. Very engaging. Again, we're falling in love with the problem. We're not really looking at solution yet. We had some ideas, but I think we sorted it out. The next step, and Steve and I will have to figure out, can we, develop this further? Can we look at this Larry situation where with the current employee versus new employee, is there some ideas around that? How can Agile help in terms of thinking around that? We have confidence.
That's a million seller. Yeah. Write the book.
With you, three of us. Yes. No, I mean, we have confidence. We have confidence that Agile can fix almost anything. So maybe that's false confidence, but we think it can. So this would be an interesting assignment. So I appreciate, Larry, you for volunteering to help us with that. So thank you. Anyway, we can stay on if we not. People will have to go. Rebecca, thank you very much. Tremendous job. I learned a lot. We'll have the recording probably in a day or so, and then we'll meet again on October 13th, where the focus is going to be on creating a change-ready mindset in the HR team from some people at Walmart. There's done some interesting things in terms of Agile and new thinking. So,
is it possible to get Rebecca's video link somehow?
Yeah, we're going to include that in the PowerPoint. We'll send it.
Okay, thank you then.
Rebecca, thank you so much, Rebecca. It was, as I predicted, it was wonderful, and you were inspiring. And it's always such a delight and pleasure to see you and to work with you. So anytime I get the chance to do that, I'm going to take it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I hope that it was helpful, and I hope we all learned a little bit more than when we came. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Steven, hold on. Oh, too late. You left.